Hello and welcome to another episode of me reacting to fan-made cards I found online. And today's first set of cards are a few hate cards actually, and one corporation, one really fun one, made by Gady Lager 122, and he or she posted them on Reddit a while back already. So let's start right off. And the first one we have here is Aggressive Mining Company. It has an effect similar to a Great Escarpment Consortium, where you can remove one steel prod off of one of your opponents and gain one steel prod yourself. It costs 13 MC, has a building tag, which is different to Great Escarpment Consortium, and it also grants you some instant resources. Let's say you have a use for the steel immediately, then this costs 9 instead of 13. So basically 3 more than Great Escarpment Consortium. And for these 3 MC, you get a building tag and 2 heat, which I think is a reasonable value. I think this is reasonably well balanced. What I notice immediately is, I think, to be more similar to Great Escarpment Consortium and AMC, is it should have a requirement that you have steel prod. That would probably make it a little bit fairer as well, so you can't just put this out immediately at the start. But you could also say that's a conscious decision, and another reason why this costs, let's say 3 MC more than Great Escarpment Consortium after removing the 4 MC from the steel that you immediately get. And the only question that remains is, does the game need more hate cards? And I think it's not a problem, especially if you play with all expansions. The amount of hate cards, I think, drops a bit, because the base game has a lot of them, whether they are Great Escarpment and AMC, a lot of plant hate, you have the 2 energy tappings, and you really don't get a lot of these hate cards in the expansions, I feel. So you could definitely add another one in there. And we will have, I think, 4 more really interesting hate cards in this set. So let's take a look at the next one, which is Instantiated Earthquake. I don't really know how to pronounce that word. I don't even know what it really means. But the requirement is that you have a tile on Mars. It costs 4 MC and is an event. And then afterwards, all players remove 1 marker from one of their tiles on Mars. So the tile stays there, but it doesn't belong to them anymore. And you immediately get 2 steel. So you pay back the cost of the card. Of course, if you bought it in a draft, you still paid 3 MC for that. You won't get that back, but it's a cheap event. So if you have discounts, media group or your IC, you can make this basically net positive in terms of money. And then we can talk about this effect here, which is something we don't have in the game so far and is, in my opinion, really interesting. Of course, the idea here, or the optimal situation in which you should play this, is when you have at least 1 special tile on Mars that doesn't grant any points. So, for example, a nuke zone, and not, for example, what's called commercial district, because you need to hold on to that tile until the end of the game, so it scores you some points. Nuke zone, after you place that, it doesn't do anything other than it belongs to you for example, landlord. But this card here is net neutral for landlord if you have a tile on Mars already. So yeah, the optimal situation is you have a special tile on Mars that doesn't grant any points, and the opponents have no special tiles on Mars, but cities or greeneries, because they, at the end of the game, score points. Especially if the opponent only has, let's say it's, okay, the absolute worst scenario for the opponent is he only has 1 tile on Mars, and that's a city, and it's surrounded by 6 greeneries that, of course, aren't his, because then he could remove a cube off of the greeneries. But if he then has to remove the cube off of the city, he loses a lot of points. But even in the early game, if you have a city on Mars and you planned on placing greeneries around it during the rest of the game, this can be devastating because cities are really expensive and a lot of their value comes from the points at the end of the game. And if you have to remove a cube off of a city, that's just crazy. The problem with this card is that there are a lot of situations where your opponent also has special tiles on Mars, or even if you're playing 3 or 4 player, it could very well be the case that everyone has a special tile on Mars. And then this card basically doesn't do anything. So it's a very situational hate card that can score really, really well, especially in a 2-player game. But let's move on to the next one. I like the concept. I think it's an interesting idea. Next one is Malware. I think it has a slight typo up here, but doesn't matter. Costs 9 MC, has a wild tag. I always love me some wild tags. You choose one target player and he has to lower a production of your choice, and then you draw 2 cards. First of all, thematically, I think this card should hold maybe negative BP. You could say the same thing about this one and that one. Hate cards, I think it would make sense if they all hold negative VP. They don't do that in the base game, or at least not all of them. Hackers, for example, has a negative VP on that, and Malware is really, really close thematically to Hackers, so I think it would make sense. In the 2P game, I think this card is actually quite good. Wild tags are valuable. Compare this, for example, to Research Coordination. Research Coordination costs 4 MC and does nothing else than granting a wild tag. This card grants 2 cards as well. Let's say 2 cards, each of them is worth 2 MC. So you're already up to 8 MC of value just from the wild tag and the 2 cards. And then you also get to lower production by 1 step. You can just choose plant or titanium production, and that would be massive. So I think this card is massively underpriced, and a negative point on here would make a lot of sense and would still make this card playable, in my opinion. If you get Malware in the early game, costs 9 MC and has a negative point, and then all of the other effects here, I still would keep it. I think it's still a great card. It's super flexible. It's not like AMC or Greatest Cardman Consortium or the tapping cards, where you require your opponent to have one specific type of production. It can be everything. You can even use it on MC prod. Of course, that's not really that valuable, but if your opponent just doesn't get any other prod up and you need the wild tag, that's still some value and you get 2 cards back. I think this card is really, really strong and could use a nerf. But let's get to the next one. Just Mars Aurora. Costs 9 MC, requires 2 power tags, which I really like. There are too few cards that require power tags or depend on power tags or whatever. Power tag is just rather useless tag. It's a space event, so tons of combo potential as always. And it has a crazy effect. So all players, or all opponents, not all players, not you, just the opponents, lose 2 MC per energy production they have. So if you have 6 MC and you get hit by Mars Aurora, you lose 12 MC. If you have 6 power prod, you lose 12 MC. And if someone cannot pay, you get 2 MC. Now the question is, let's say the opponent has 6 power prod, but they only have 4 MC. They could pay 4 MC. Does this effect, this lower effect, then give you 8 MC because they can only pay for 2 of the power prods that they have and not for the remaining 4? Or does it just trigger once when someone cannot pay in full, for example? That should be clarified, but either way, I think this is too swingy and too strong. It's an incredible counter to cards like Mass Converter and Quantum Extractor, or Corona Extractor, or what that other one is called in the expansions, that are really strong and give you insane amounts of power for their cost. You could say if someone has gotten these science pieces down and gotten that power prod for incredibly good value, then it's only fair to hit them with something as strong as Mars Aurora. And I mean, this card also costs quite a lot. So it costs 3 to buy and 9 to play. And then you also need to have 2 power attacks, which often is not even that easy. So you need to get something great out of this relatively high cost. And often it will be the case that you don't even get money back. So I think you should make this cheaper, keep the requirement, but then say that all opponents lose 2 MC if they have any power production. So it has a maximum of what you have to pay, and each time someone cannot pay, you get 2 MC. That way it's also clarified, because they only have to pay 2 MC, and if they can't pay that, then you get money. What you also could do is you cap this at a higher amount, so they lose 2 MC per energy production they have, to up to a maximum of, let's say, 6. And then you say each time an opponent cannot pay in full, you get 2 MC. So you get a maximum of 2 MC out of each opponent, and they have to pay a maximum of 6 MC, let's say, like that. I think that way it would be much more balanced. You could make the card a little bit cheaper. That way it wouldn't be as situational, but still not as frustrating if someone gets hit with it if they have like 10 power prod, which does happen sometimes. And it's not, having 10 power prod is not a clear sign of winning. Sometimes it is. If you get the power prod out of mass converter, then a mass converter and quantum, then it often is also a good sign that they are winning. But sometimes you just have nothing else to play. Maybe you're playing Thorgate, so you're just playing a lot of power production cards because they're a bit cheaper, and you want to use that as heat. That's not a clear sign that they're winning, and then you shouldn't also be punished for that as strongly. But yeah, definitely an interesting concept, and I really like the requirement of power attacks. Let's get to the next one, which is Oxyhydrogen reaction. Costs 14 MC, is another event. You are allowed to place an ocean and lower another player's TR by 1 step. So really asymmetric again in games with more than 2 players, because you can only hit 1 opponent with this effect. Mars Aurora hits everyone, but all the other cards here, they hit... Oh no! This one also hits all players, but Aggressive Mining Company, Malware, and Oxyhydrogen reaction are all quite asymmetric and therefore best in 2P. And I think this card is too cheap. Compare this to Subterranean Reservoir, which costs 11 and lets you place an ocean. In 2P, paying 14 for basically the ocean plus 1 TR, that's too good. I would probably bump this up to 16. The problem then is that it's not useless, but really not that great in 3 or even 4 player games, because you are only hitting 1 player, and you need to really know who is the player you're competing with for first place. Or if you're going for second place, because 1 player is already that much in the lead, then you need to know who's competing with you for second place. And if you don't hit the right target, then this basically just grants 1 ocean. And if it's an ocean for 16, then it's just too expensive, because you also need to pay for it in a draft and so on. You could also say all players lose 1 all opponents lose 1 TR. That way it's not asymmetric and still works in 3 and 4P. I would be fine with that as well, I think. But the fun thing with hate cards is that you have to put some thought behind them, and having to choose the target is actually quite interesting, I think. So yeah, I think it's too cheap, but if we make it more expensive, it could be problematic in higher player counts. But interesting card nonetheless. And I think now we get to the last card of this set. And it's not a hate card anymore. It's a really funny corporation that is probably really bad and has a problem in its effect that we need to talk about. But I like the concept. So the thing with this corp is that you can only buy one card out of your starting 10. So whenever you have really good starting cards, this corp is atrocious because you cannot keep these starting cards. You can only buy one card. But there are certain scenarios where your starting cards aren't that great. Maybe you have 2 or 3 good cards, but you are also fine with just keeping one of them if the effect of the corp is strong enough. And this corp lets you draw 6 freaking cards for free. Of course, they have to hold these specific tags or symbols. So a heat symbol, and then a power tag, city tag, science tag, plant tag, and Jovian tag. The problem, of course, is again, this is a strong or a very diverse mix of cards that probably won't combo well together, but gives you a lot of flexibility, probably. And the thing is, you start off with a wild tag. That means that you can probably lean into science combos, you can probably lean into Jovian combos, you can probably lean into plant or the green combo a little bit more, and these cards then just complement it. And of course, you also have an effect, and this effect has a slight problem because it says during research phase, your opponents may show you one of their discarded cards. You can pay them 3 MC to take it into your hand. This may needs to be cut. It has to say during research phase, your opponents have to show you one of their discarded cards if they have any discarded cards. Because if it just says they may show you one of the discarded cards, they can just always say, no, I won't show you any of my discarded cards, and then you can never buy any of them. Why would they show you any cards? Even atrocious cards could be used by you in some way. So this needs to be, the formulation here needs to be changed a bit. And then I think it's actually pretty interesting because the opponents have a choice. They always have a choice to buy all 4 cards, and then they have no cards to show you. So they can't show you any, and you cannot buy any of them. But they can also show you cards that they think you will buy, and then make use out of the 3 MC that they get, because you pay them 3 MC. So that concept, I think, is very, very interesting, because it doesn't only give you more options, it also gives the opponents more options. And is actually something that we don't have in the game yet, trading resources or trading cards, and I think is really, really interesting. I still think this corp would be too weak, because like in, let's say 95% of cases, you wouldn't even pick this no matter what the rest of this corp says. Just that the fact that you can buy only one card out of your starting hand is really, really weak and limiting. But it's a really interesting concept. I think you could make it a little bit stronger by giving it another wild tag, giving it 2 wild tags, makes it insanely strong in performing combos. That, in fact, is counteracted by the fact that you can buy only 1 card. So if you have, let's say, AI Central on hand and a few science tags, and maybe AGT, you have to decide which one do you keep. Of course, you will get another science tag, but maybe that one is hard to play. You will have your 2 wild tags. So it's a really interesting situation. And I think it's just a bit funny because of the name and the picture. And I think this is a great concept that could be worked on. But I would love something like this in the game. Maybe thematically a bit more fitting, but it's just a fun concept. So yeah, next up we have, I think, a single card made by GerotixYT, and it's another corp. It's called Fuuki Conglomerate. It has an Earth tag and a City tag. Starts with 66 MC, and you get all 4 drafted prelude cards. That's not all though. The effect says that you automatically pass for the first 2 generations. And then in the 3rd gen, only in the 3rd gen, all cards that you play cost 1 less MC. So basically research outpost just for 1 gen. The thing is, yeah, you pass for the first 2 generations, but you have 2 preludes more and their production accumulates throughout these 2 generations. So if you have strong production cards in your starting 10, so production projects, you cannot play them in the first 2 generations, which will suck. But you can play them in the 3rd generation, still not too late. And you have very high starting capital and 4 instead of 2 preludes. So not being able to play any cards in the first 2 generations is kind of offset by having 2 more preludes. Of course, in some situations, you draw really shitty preludes. There are at least 5 or 6 bad preludes. And if you get any combination of these, this corporation sucks ass. Because you will already struggle to find 2 good preludes to keep out of those 4. Let's say you have ecology experts, but no card to play with it. Society support, nitrogen shipment, and early settlement. Yeah, you would end up with 3 plant prod, but that's no, 4 plant prod, right? Yeah, each of those gives 1 plant prod, but you cannot even play ecology experts if you don't have a card to play with it. So you get only 3 plant prod. So that situation would just be atrocious. But if you have 4 good preludes, and then maybe some great mid-game cards, maybe some discounts, some card draw, that you can all get down in Generation 3, together with this insane starting capital and the discount in Gen 3, this corporation is really strong. And I think it's even too strong. And it's sadly also, I think, a bit unfun to play, because choosing 2 out of your starting 4 preludes is one of the most interesting decisions in the early game, or right at the start of the game. And I wouldn't remove this decision from the game. I would let you decide every time. It's just fun. And then passing for the first 2 gens is also quite boring. Basically, you can just, all right, guys, I'm going to the toilet, or all right, guys, I'm going to the kitchen. Tell me when it's Gen 3. That's just not fun. And if this corp would be implemented online, I think it would lead to a lot of players just going AFK and wouldn't be healthy for the game. So something similar could be interesting. Maybe the effect says you can only play 1. I mean, thematically, it makes sense because it's lore-wise, it's a corporation that comes late to the party and tries then to compete with the other corporations by rapidly developing. But you could maybe change this effect a bit and say you can only play 1 card for the first 2 gens each. And instead of keeping all 4 preludes, maybe you keep 3 out of 4. Because this is then a bit less restrictive, and then this can be a bit more restrictive, and that way you still have a choice, which will be interesting. And you have a really interesting choice in these generations, because you can only play 1 card per gen. You cannot activate it, so you cannot play a card draw, so like continuous card draw, you need to play a production card, and you need to really think what's the best card to play in these 2 gens. It will still be a little bit unfun, because just playing 1 card and then having to pass can be frustrating, but it's an interesting concept, and it can be tweaked a little bit, and then I think it will be fine. But let's get to the last card of today's video, which was made by somberterribletruth, another Reddit user. And as always, I have linked all the Reddit posts in the description, so if you want to check these creators out and leave them an upvote, that would be highly appreciated. And let's get to laabs, which is the last corporation of today's video. This corporation starts with 46 MC, and as your first action, you draw 2 green cards. As you know, there are green, blue, and red cards, and green are basically the fire and forget cards. You just play them. Afterwards, you only have to look at their tags, and they give you production or resources or whatever. And the corp holds a space tag and a science tag, which is, especially the science tag, is really valuable. Space tech less so. There are things like Space Baron or satellites, but other than that, it's not that useful on a corporation. And the fact is that you can discard one event card from hand, and for that you gain 4 MC and you draw from the deck until you get a green card. Of course, this effect is strongest if combined with card draw, because if you don't have any continuous card draw, you have a lower likelihood of, like, the effect, using the effect is, I think, good, because the card itself, the effect at the event that you throw away has value of 3, let's say it like that. So you already are net positive here, and you get another card for it. But the thing is, what if you don't have any event cards on hand? And for that, I think you need to have some continuous card draw when playing this corporation. And then I think it would be quite strong, especially because you also draw 2 free cards at the start. That can be useful for planner, or if you have bad starting hands, or you have preludes that grant you high starting capital, but you don't have enough cards to play. So I think this corp would be strong, although maybe thematically a little bit boring, because green cards can be all kinds of stuff. They are not one strategy that you then know you want to go for, and you know your corp is good at that one strategy. They are like, it could be plant prod, it could be space cards, it could be science, it could be whatever. And you just will just have a wild mix of stuff on your hand. And I think the corps that steer you into one specific direction, of course, are less flexible and therefore maybe a little bit weaker. But they are, in my opinion, also more fun because you are immersed into their playstyle. If you're playing Ecoline, for example, you know, okay, I'm going to pump out greeneries, I'm going to rush up the terraforming tracks. And then if you're playing Saturn systems, you know, okay, I'm going for a long game and Jovian strategy. With Satellabs, it's more or less, all right, I'm going for whatever. Maybe the science tech will steer you a little bit into a long game, especially because green cards can be long game centered, or at least event cards are more rushy, and you have to discard event cards to get green cards. But still, I think thematically it's not as strong as other cards we've seen so far. But I still like the concept of having to discard cards and then getting other, not similar, but different cards back. I think that's quite interesting. But yeah, as always, I think we're at the end of this episode, and as always, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing. And also definitely let me know in the comments what you think of these cards and corporations. And also check out the description for the original Reddit posts. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.